A very good morning, everyone. I just like to thank all of you for taking time to join this call. And most importantly, if you are here, it means that you have been a Holistics customer for some time. And thanks for all your support that you've given to us over the years. And in this session, I want to introduce the launch of the new Holistics to all of you. Today's session will be a little packed. As you can see, the different items I'll be going through. So as much as possible, I will try to be brief, and if there's anything that you'd like to clarify, I will hope to answer it at the end of the session, or you can just type it into the chat box. Right. So I want to start off the call by giving an introduction of what this session is about and some quick company updates. So if you are here, it's likely mean that you are on the existing version of Holistics version 2 of 2.5. And if you would like to check how to find your version settings, you can go into the Holistics app, click into this question mark, and you can see this on the last line over here, right? So a few logistics, mute yourself, unless you would like to share. Feel free to type in questions along the way. The third is that this video recording will be made available to everyone. Right? There are actually two recordings. We'll find one of them to publish it onto our guides. And when I talk about the new Holistics, I will loosely refer it as it's actually reads either Holistics 2.7 and Holistics 3. So don't worry about the semantics first, but about 2.7 or 3.0, you'll be basically getting largely the same thing, if not even better. So a little about our company direction and roadmap. We are very much focused on the whole analytics ops, data ops setup of things. Meaning to say that if you want to have self-service analytics that's reliable in a company that the consumers can trust, it's up to our whole focus to make sure that the process, is made easier for our customers to manage. And our approach to do that is through the analytics engineering best practice and making data more reliable and easier to use for even the data consumer. And this is important for data consumers too, because it's also an important element of what empowers you to create your own reports without the need to know SQL or SQL. So the second, so the past 2 years, we have been very thankful to be ranked number 2 across the whole BI industry, given the time that we've been around and compared to other established players like Tableau, Power BI, Click, and Looker, we actually ranked number 2 by our customers in terms of software usability for 2 consecutive years. I'd like to thank all of you for taking your time to give that review and for giving us this opportunity to support your data needs. So last year, we won a new award, which is that we are the second best data analysis tool globally, just ranked right after Tableau. They gauge it by the number of reviews count and also the web search interest. We also publish a guidebook for you or your friends who may be starting up an analytics stack. So this talks about not just Holistics, but about how we see the analytics industry as a whole, what tools are available, and what challenges are there when you're trying to set up your own analytics stack from scratch. So feel free to share this with any of your friends or even for yourself. It's meant for the slightly technical data audience. So, but I think it's a good way for you to understand what the data team is going through. Right, so let me go through briefly into why we are doing this, why we are launching the new version of Holistics. And a lot of it is basically based on the feedback that we have from all of you, our customers, the interactions, our conversations with the industries, and we notice what is the limitations of the existing Holistics. So the first thing is that if you look at how Holistics work, one nice thing that we do for our customers is that instead of buying different tools for different purpose, one for ETL, one for data reporting, one for data delivery, and one for data visualizations, the existing version of Holistics actually allows you to do all of them in one place. You have one tool, Holistics Data Import, that allows you to move data from any source to any destination. You have Holistics Data Transform, which allows you to summarize your raw data into aggregated or summarized data set. And of course, you have the visualization component. And the fourth is that, if you want to deliver holistics through email, SFTP, embed it into your own applications, these are all possible, right? The first problem that we see, and this is not just, unique to holistic, is the communication overhead that happens between the data teams and the data consumers. And one of the problems is that in holistics, in the existing version of holistics, while it's great to filter your own data, sometimes as a data consumer, you cannot create your own reports unless you know SQL, right? So what this means is, what contribute to this is that, minor variations of existing reports that you see needs a help from the data team. For example, you see a report, you want to add a new filter value, hey, data team, can you help me with this? Or maybe you see two different kind of reports. Both of them have the columns you need, but they don't have all the columns you need individually. You want to say, can I have a third report that has this set of columns I want from these two reports? You also need to ask the data team for help. And sometimes you just say, hey, and I just want to add a very simple new data field, right, which is like a arithmetic calculation, right? Like I have a revenue column, I have a cost column, I want to create my own profit column. And it's not very flexible to extract the right columns you want in an existing report. So the way that we do it is that, some of the data team do is that they create like one master report with a lot of columns, so that any group of users, whichever columns you need, you can find it in that report. But it's not very flexible to extract just the columns a data consumer needs. Sometimes too much information, creates that kind of mental overheads. You need to export it into Excel, remove the unnecessary column before you actually send it out, right? The second problem is that even though we kind of provide the all-in-one platform and interface, the definitions, all the work that you do in these four components, import, transform, reports, and data delivery, are very disparate and disconnected. So think about it, right? When the data team creates a new report for you, it's kind of like creating a new Google Docs or the new Microsoft Word document, right? And there are some shared components, maybe a shared introductions, paragraph. And then as more and more people ask for their reports, you kind of create 100 different reports. And some of those reports have those same data definitions. But what happens when the data definitions change? You want to change the way you group your demographic. You want to change the way you group your pricing structure. Now the data team has to look back at all the previous reports that has been created and change those definitions manually one by one. And through your support team requests, when we analyze it, a number of them actually happens when you want to do some major revamp of your data. So we have customers sending a request. Can I have a list of all reports that refers to this physical data table or this physical data field, right? And we can generate that from a metadata level, but again, it also shows that whatever change you need to make it separately, right? And what's the impact of this? It's actually possible for the same metric in different report to contradict each other, especially if they are written at different times or by a different analyst, right? The second problem is really more for the data team, right? Is that they spend a lot more time repeating work that could have been integrated and connected together. And they can't build on the previous work that has been done by their previous data team. The third is that whenever there's a data error, hey, this data doesn't look correct, it's kind of hard to troubleshoot, right? Is it because of the data loading problem, or is it because of the way the report was written, or was it because at the data capture side there was actually an error? It's hard to troubleshoot them. So then the fourth issue is that sometimes the data teams, the data engineers kind of write a materialized view to kind of speed up the performance, right? And they say, hey, analysts, instead of querying the raw tables from scratch, query this materialized view or the data transform table in holistics, so that your report can run faster. However, the problem is that because it's disconnected and disparate, even though it's still within holistics, as a new analyst that come on board or whenever you have a new request, it's kind of additional overhead to check, hey, are there any additional data transform tables that already existed that I can build on? What the analysts tend to do is that they tend to write a fresh new query of report that query the base table. And then the consumers have to ask, why does this query take such a long time to run? And then the data engineer should have already fixed this issue, but because of the busyness of the work, it's kind of difficult for the analyst, to even think back, right, and just say, oh, I need to remember to go and query this back. So what does all this friction working with data cause, right? It really discourages self-service, right? The self-service component is that, as a data consumer, sometimes you see a certain column or the data field, and you ask the analyst, right, what does this field mean? And then a new team member joined and they may ask that same question again when this has been already an answered question. So data team spends a lot more time answering questions that has already been defined, right? Or maybe you have a new analyst that joins the team and then they wouldn't know like what are the reports that has been created, what are the base component that has been built. They kind of just rebuild and redo on their own. And sometimes they realize that what they spend like a few days on actually has already been worked on or has a report being prepared for that, but they were not aware about that issue, right? So I'm going to share a little bit about the new holistics going into the demo later. And before that, I want to share, what does all these versions mean, right? Right now you're on 2.0, 2.5. Why is 3.0 and why is 2.7 that we are seeing on this website? So in sometime in September 2018, we launched a first release of the new holistics, and we didn't want to release it to our existing customers because I think we were still figuring out whether this is a problem worth solving, whether we have the ability to find an elegant solution, whether this is something the market likes. So in February 2020 onwards, we actually rolled it out to production, right? So from September 2018 or to February 2020, we have a few intense, R&Ds and the market conversation with selected users. And in February 2020, we launched the stable version of Holistics version 3, which means to say that all new users who sign up during that time, will actually go into this version 3. And in this holistics version 3, there's a bias on how we think analytics should be done, which is very fundamentally different from how we think, how we think about that in the old way of doing holistics. In the old way of doing holistics, I got a report, write an SQL query, publish it, add some filters, and we are done. You kind of like solve the problem at that right point. So this version, after it is stabilized and we tested it, is also pretty opinionated in that you need to all the dashboard and the report has to be built by the dataset, and the dataset is the equalizer. Be it you are the data team or you're the data consumer, you can actually treat the dataset like a giant pivot table. You can drag and drop to build your own reports. And what the data team will be doing is to define centralized definitions. That means to say each of these data sets are actually a subset of all your data models, right? So if you have 10 data models, 50 data models, you take 2 to 3 of them or any 5 of them, you combine it, become one data set for the marketing team, one data set for the customer success team, one for operations, one for sales. You can have very dedicated data sets, and that becomes an equalizer. So it's no longer just the data team who can create reports. Anyone in the company who knows the data that they want and who understand what the data of the context means can build their own reports. And the third thing, which is actually a large internal motivation from holistics, is that we actually find a unifying concept across all these different disparate components. Data imports, data transform, data reports, data managers, and data filters are all binded by a common parent, which is called data models and data sets. So what's stopping us from just saying, hey, let's just do a whole release of Holistics version 3 and make it available to all our existing customers? I think we went through a few rounds of intense discussion internally. I think the trade-off was that the way that our current customers, which is our long-time customer, bought from us, is because of the ease of just writing SQL, create a report, and the whole flexibility it brings, without actually thinking about without that much priority on the long-term maintainability concept, right? And what does it mean for the existing report? Do we want our existing customer to kind of like just migrate everything? And from a user interface perspective, it may not be that intuitive, for some of our customers, especially in the early stages. So we eventually came out to this version, which is a hybrid version of the new holistics and the old holistics, right? Which is holistics 2.7, the best of both worlds. And we actually use this internally within holistics because we are also using holistics ourselves. So, all the issues have also been stabilized. And the goal, right, is to help our existing customers provide this flexibility of gradually transitioning away to the new way of doing reporting if that resonates with you, right? And if you do not feel the need to port over your old reports, it's also okay because both the version 2 and version 3 reports can coexist, right? The known drawback that we know is that now there are two ways to create reports. So you can create a report through an ad hoc SQL query, or you can create a report through a data modeling dataset approach, which enables non-technical users to build their own reports. But that may be confusing, maybe for the new data team members. And this is also one of the reasons we never put the default new version of Holistics to have these two versions, right? That you can do a SQL way, you can do a modeling way for our new customers because they got to learn two very different approach of doing the same thing, which is to create reports. So what you will see in version 2.7 is this, right? When you create a new report, instead of bringing you to the SQL editor, you'll be asked, right? Hey, do you want to use the previous way you are already using, or do you want to try it, from a data set, right? And if you want to create a new dashboard, you will have a choice between whether you want to create a new dashboard base for version 3 or version 2, right? And you can see this dashboard base within your top dashboard corner. You see a version 3. You can see an example over here, right? So the quick note is that there is some, if you create a report in version 2, you cannot add it to a dashboard 3.0. If you create a report in 3.0, you cannot add it to a dashboard 2.0. So it has to be, the one way of doing things, right? So even in terms of the data preparations, in terms of data imports and transform, what you will see in version 2 and version 2.5 is that when you click on data center, you'll see these three choices. And you can go over here. You will see that the data center exists. If you go to version 3, right, you will not see data center at all because it's been integrated. You only see a data modeling interface, right? So in version 2.7, you will see both this and the data modeling in one screen. All right. So we are still in the process. All the major porting over of features has already been done. There are still some features that we have not yet fully migrated over from version 2 to version 3. So for example, in version 3, we have not yet supported Oracle database. In terms of data imports, we support Google Sheets import, but not the Google Drive imports. So reporting itself, you no longer need query templates. And we have not yet fully ported over KPI comparison time period, even though we already have a metric sheet that you all may see over here. And I will share more with you on this metric sheets later, right? Filters wise, parent-child filters and list filters are not ported to version 3, but the way that you add new filters in version 3 is a lot more intuitive. That's what we like to believe, right? There are still some data import capabilities that we have not moved over. So for example, once you move a data over, some of you may have applied some data transformation on top of it or apply some conditions. So that itself is not yet available, right? So I want to share a bit about the benefits of the new holistics. So what's really in it for the data consumer, right? If you look at holistics version 2, from a consumer perspective, right now, even if you don't do anything, you can do a static drilling of data, right? Those of you who's been with us for some time know that you can make a whole column into the hyperlink that pushes into a destination report. In version 2.7 and 3.0, the new holistics, we have a new role for the viewer. The first is that even if you're a normal viewer, you can actually drill into the data. So what this means is that, especially for the data team, when you design your dashboard, you can have high-level dashboard, and then you can let your users right-click and drill into a more detailed version of the dashboard. The next consumer role that we created is a new role called Data Explorer. So the Data Explorer, besides just consuming the existing dashboard, they can also build their own reports, even if they do not know SQL, right? And they also have the ability, when they drag and drop the fields, know what each of these data fields mean. And they can also add basic simple business calculations, which is right now still in our alpha stage. So this is an example of the drilling data. So you can go across here. Right now I have a chart that goes by the day. You can do a drill by the quarter. So we are moving this aggregation by monthly to quarterly. And of course, you can still hide certain fields that you want. Now, if you look at this data field on the sales by country that you see here, if I want to know the breakdown of, say, Singapore sales, right now I have my sales by different country. I'll right click on the color legend that shows the Singapore color, go to drill through, and I can go onto here to the level 1 breakdown. So what we do is that we'll pass the value that you right click on, which is Singapore, and actually push it as a parameter into a new dashboard filter. So you can see that this is a breakdown of all the Singapore users. You can also push down more data, right? If you want to know, say, the number of Indonesia users in Jakarta that's less than 20 years old and are female, you can do a right click on our pivot table, do a drill through, and in your destination dashboard, instead of passing just one value, you can pass all 4 values, right? Jakarta, under 20, female, and Indonesia. Right. So next, I'm going to share with you how you can actually create a report that looks like this, right, through the drag and drop interface. So the first thing that you notice is that you see that there are data sets, right? So data sets, think about it as if it's a giant pivot table for data consumers on a very crude level, right? And as a data team, you can share this data set with either users or user group, or you can also share it with them such that on the records level access control, such that different users from different countries or different email addresses will see different sets of data. So maybe you like your account managers, who owns a certain set of customers, to only see data that's relevant for themselves, right? So that's possible. And so right now, let's try to build a new report from this data set called e-commerce data set. So there is an e-commerce data set. And what you will notice, what happened over here? If I click on this, okay. So if you look at the e-commerce data set, all these are called the model tables, and each table has a field, right? As a data consumer, you can scroll through each of this and actually see that, hey, what does this specific field mean, right? Like the count of registered users. You can even do something more complicated, say like, your canceled orders, your delivered orders. So all these data models and fields both are related in this setup, right? So when you create a data set, these relationships are already mapped, right? That you have this one-to-many, the many-to-ones relationship. So this should be familiar for the data team. For the data consumers, the Excel users, you all can think about it as this one giant VLOOKUP and one giant HLOOKUP that kind of relates to each other on the crude level, right? And because we know this relationship, you can actually do whatever that you want to build. In this case, we want to build a pivot table. And I can put a user count over here, an order count. And what do I want for the row? I want a country for the row. And I want a city's name to go into the row. And notice here, right, that my country's field name is actually the same as my city's field name. So what you can do in the new holistic is that you can do a custom label and change this to country. And you can change this to city, right? And in terms of the columns, maybe you want to split them by age group and gender. So when you click on get results over here, what Holistics will do is that we will actually construct this SQL query on the fly for anybody who's exploring the data, including the data team. So you don't have to do the repetitive work. We do all the hard work for you, and you can just get the result. And now you can save this whole report, right? Personal report 3, right? You can add in some description. This is my first report. And you can choose to save it if you are the data team for the company dashboard. In this case, you'll be your whole company name over here and all the subfolders. Or if you are the data explorer, you can actually add this into your own personal workspace, right? And once you add this in, you can see that the dashboard is now added into over here. And here you can resize your dashboard. And it gives you the flexibility to do a lot of personalization, right, of the data that you want to see that's relevant for yourself, right? So that's it from the data consumer perspective, right? And if you are the data team who wants to add a filter or the data explorer, adding the filter also no longer require you to know the SQL behind. All you need to do, if let's say I want to create a duplicate countries filter, is just to select the data set that basically stores the fields that you want. In this case, I have a data set called e-commerce data set. Go to the countries model and find the name. Click on OK. And notice that the drop-down value of these filters are automatically updated here, right? And at the bottom here, you notice that all these widgets actually share the same data set, which is why they already have the countries in their, among the setup that they have. You also see that there are certain widgets that comes from a different data set. In this case, it comes from a user's data set. There's no countries. So whenever you update a country value here, say, for example, in the Philippines, you update it, it will not apply for all these grayed out widgets, right? Then the next thing that you do is that how do you enable drill through? That means you want to let a third party dashboard, another dashboard, drill into the data of this dashboard, right? Into this filter value. You can just click on drill through enabled. So if you right click on any country's fields in another Holistics dashboard, maybe say Malaysia, and you want to you click on that, it will pass that Malaysia value into here, right? The way that we do drill throughs. So this drill through will enable you to do that. And what this means is that whenever you enable this filter, this filter to have drill through enabled, each time when you actually navigate this drill through, a new dashboard will automatically populate over here. So for data teams who's been trying to set up drills, this may be welcome for some of you because you no longer need to do things on a one-to-one basis for things to work, because there's this common factor across how data sets and data models work. So that's the idea behind how you can actually create the value of it from a data consumer perspective, right? So I shared with you the drilling of data, building your own reports, knowing the context of your data fields. So you reduce the communication overhead between the data consumer and the data team to ask, what does this data mean? Another thing you can do in when you're creating a widget is that you can also add custom business calculations. This is something that's still in the alpha stage. However, over here, what you can do is that you can add additional column and say business calculation. And you can do certain things like a simple sum, average, or median. Right now, our business calculation in this current version still requires some form of SQL knowledge, even though it's available for data explorers to use. But as time goes forward, we would want to have it such that even if you are Excel user, you are able to use business calculations. And that's the way we see it. going forward. So that's the business calculation part. And from a data team perspective, I'm going to share with you the next demo, right? And before that, I want to share with you what we have went through earlier. So I shared with you, right, about existing dashboard and how you can create your own dashboard widgets from an existing data set. But what I have not shared, and this next 10 minutes will be for the data teams. So if you're a data consumer, you can probably pause for a while and relax. But this is now I'm going to show, right, how a data team can create a data set to support your data consumer better. And the next is actually I'm going to spend more time and effort on how data models work, because this is actually the core. So to create a new data set, what you can do is that you can just select from an existing list of your data models that you have already created, right? And I will share with the data team how to create the data models, but for now, just assume that data models are created and that data models are just another table and fields, right, and relationships. So right now, I just select that, hey, in this data set, I want to create, say, for the marketing team, I want to give the cities model, I want to have the countries model, I want to give the merchants, order items, order, product, and the users. Click on next. And you notice that we have this relationship list that shows the many to ones, the one to many, or the one-to-one relationship, or even the many to many. And here you can see that without any work that's needed on your side, these relationships are already being met because they already been done on the data modeling layer, right? The only thing to note is that there are certain times where there may be a conflict. So for example, if you try to say, hey, how come this orders ID doesn't work? It's because you can't create, it may cause some ambiguity, right? And I will go, this one is something that we can go through with you in more details if you actually face it. But it's more like, if you can actually refer a certain field by different pathway, right? That will cause the issue. So what we can do over here is that we can just remove the product ID, the product order from the data set, and that's it. You can just create a new data set, right? And with this new data set, you can share it either with users or user groups, or share them on the access control level, so that any data consumers who view the dashboard will only see data related to themselves, right? So that's it. What I shared with you is how you can build a new data set with existing models. Now I'm going to share with you the key part about holistics, which is the data modeling layer. And this is actually where most of our R&D has been in, right? So there are actually three ways to create the data model in holistics. The first way is that you can do a data import. So think about it, we have unified data import as a model into holistics. You can do the Google Sheets, you can do the Google Analytics, or move data from any of your source database to your data warehouse, the same way that you have done it with holistics. The second is that you can write a fully native SQL query to get the results of the table, and that results of the table, that table will become the model. The columns in that table will become the data fields available for the data consumers, right? I will first start with the base foundation, which is what are the base model that you need to build. So what we are doing here is that we are going to take the existing data models, the existing physical data tables that you have, and build a data model on top of it, right? And in doing so, what we are doing when we create a model from a table is that we are creating a meta layer, right? That basically doesn't contain your physical storage of data, but it only contains the data fields, right? And it points across to your physical table. So you can see that this is a model that points over here. The name of this model is over here, e-commerce users 54. And you can say that these are my customers' information. So this is helpful for the new data team who wants to know what this model is about. So you all actually start to organize your knowledge as a data team. And then you all can start to write the description for each of these fields, right? So date of birth. So whenever you update this, it will show onto your data set level that you see over here, where when you hover across this description, so you can actually update the definition. So when a user asks you what this data means, you can basically update that definition directly into here, and it will show across to everybody who's looking at this. All right. So next, how do you add the relationship? You find the city ID field, add a relationship, and over here, you notice that you can do relationship as a many-to-one, one-to-many, or one-to-one between the city ID fields and the key over here, right? If you are looking to do a many-to-many relationship, basically you create a new composite model, like a dimension model, right? And then you just point 2 times or one-to-many relationship to it. So that can be done during the, if you all have more questions, feel free to reach out to our team. But for now, let's do a simple example where I want to do a many-to-one relationship between the city field in my users table and the actual cities table. So that's it. A field has been created. And then because for holistics, when we create this meta layer on top of your physical table, all the fields are visible by default, in whichever data set or whichever reports that the data consumers want. Sometimes some of these fields, if you have transaction codes, error codes and log files, they may add more questions and errors than they actually add value. So you can actually hide these fields, right? Like, in this case, I'm just hiding the email, first name and full name. And you notice that once you hide the field, all data sets that has this data model will no longer have these fields available, right? And you can also add custom dimensions and custom measures, for your base model, right? So that can also be done with native SQL. So if you look at an example of a completed models table, and you look at this custom measure that I created. So in this case, I'm just doing a count of the number of the IDs in this table, right? So you can see that it's all native SQL, but you kind of extract them into reusable component. And you can the way that is different from your native SQL syntax is that you just add a double curly brace and a hex to refer to a model field or the model table, right? Same thing over here, you can create a custom dimension called age. And over here, you can say that, hey, I want to know the difference between the current year and their birth year, right? So now you have this custom field called an age. Same thing, to refer to this model field, use a double curly brace and a hex. You can also do nesting on top of your dimensions and measures. So for example, I created my age group, age field when it doesn't exist just now. I can also create an age group, right? And in this case, you refer to your age field and say that if it's under 20, I want to cast it to the string, say under 20. Same thing for the different demographics. And you can preview it, right? Over here, there's an easy way for you to preview without going to the data set. I want to test out if I want to track my registered users by, say, the one that I just created by age group, get the results. Notice that we will execute this query for you on the fly, right? And this is the data that will get shown, right? So now you know that this base model actually works, right? And I'm going to share with you the next way of creating a model, but I think I still have some time. I'll pause here for 1 or 2 minutes, for a few seconds to see if anyone has any questions about the base model, what I just went through, and was the pace okay? Okay, if not, feel free to reach out to us later, right? So that's the first way to create a data model in Holistics. That's setting up the foundation that you want to build all this. Yeah, well, let me reset this for a while. Now, the second way is that how do you actually create transformations in these new models to get what you need? And over here, right, this is actually where you can write a custom SQL that builds on the base model that you have just created. So over here, notice that the syntax you see over here is just your native SQL, right? And you can put a double curly brace and a hex to refer to the fields or the table names. And you can do the joins as per what you are comfortable with. Now, the nice things about referring to holistic models over here is that you can now see a model lineage diagram, right? So instead of seeing like a huge chunk of syntax, any team member can come in and see that, hey, my master user facts aggregated table contains of data from my e-commerce users model and my order masters model. And for my e-commerce users model, it is actually a base model from my physical table of e-commerce users. My order masters come from these three underlying base model that comes from these three physical tables. So that is the way that we see this unifying factor, right? Between writing SQL report, now you can actually see the lineage itself. So the SQL is, instead of it being used as an end result of a report, you use it as a building block. So now if you have a new analyst that joining, they can just build the new individual components and the team effort will be addictive, right? On top of that. So where does data transform goes, right? So data transforms, if you all have used it enough, you'll realize that it's normally quite similar to, a SQL report, except that we do a materialized view, right? And sometimes, like what I shared earlier, you may not even realize a materialized view is available. And when your analysts start querying the raw tables, it takes a long time to run. And, you realize that you need to redesign it, right? But in this new holistics, we converge data transform and data reporting into a single concept of a transform model. And all you need to do is to choose whether you want the view to be a normal view or the materialized view with just a single click. Enable these settings, and this is where you see your familiar data transform setup, together with the refresh schedules, and you can save and run. So one thing that's made possible, right, is that in our future roadmap is that once you do the data transforms or the data import in holistics, because everything is now a model, you can actually see everything as one integrated flow, right? So you can have sequential based execution of those jobs as compared to running them on a certain time based schedule, one after the other, and estimating how long each job will take to run. So some of you may have overcome this by writing your own Airflow or Azkaban script, on the back end that trigger these jobs. But this is actually what we have, as part of the grand vision that, you may have data from different sources going through different level of transformations into your final report. You can now see them into one diagram in the DAG view concept, right? So you can save and run this. And over here, this is the same setup that you have in terms of the job runs, right? So once you are done with all of this, the nice thing is that you can now get a very diagrammatic view of how your entire database table look like. So this is all your data models combined together. And when you build a data set, you're essentially selecting any of these models to be included in your data set. Right? So what is the benefits for the data team? Number one, you work effectively and you save time. The second is that you can build a master knowledge repository of all your data definitions. It reduces onboarding time, right? And in terms of our goal going forward, at least for this year, is to focus on two key roadmaps, right? The first is the S code philosophy, where each of these data models and data sets will be available as code that you can probably check it into your own Git repository, and you can even do unit testing with it. The second is actually how we can actually approach an API first methodology. That means to say that as much as possible, what are the different APIs we can allow you to create without even going through the web user interface. Right? So just to sum up, in terms of creating reports in version 2 and version 3, in version 2, you can write a direct SQL to get a report. In version 3, it goes through a data set and a data model. right? And this is the overall flow that I shared with you just now. So what I'm going to go through next is the impact of moving to the new holistics, right? So from a software usability impact, we don't see any issues with it coexisting. You can still continue after you enable version 2.7 for your team. You can still continue to use holistics your old way, right? Just use write SQL reports and get it done. Especially if you don't see much value in the new self-service reporting or the centralized data definitions value proposition, because your existing reports will remain with you. You don't need to recreate them, although we suggest you do port them gradually for future scalability. And just keep note about the incompatibility issues. Known issues, you have two separate learning curves. So if, because you're already familiar with one approach, so you all just need to know one more new approach. If a new data team member were to join, it may not be that intuitive for them. You may need to do some hand holding there. And of course, if you need additional help, we will always be happy to schedule a call, to walk them through building either with yourself or with your team, building up the first few data models and data sets. In terms of commercial impact, if you are on our existing pricing plan that is based on objects, there should be no change. You should be able to use it. The philosophy still goes the same. You will still be priced by the number of reports as an object. And once you go to a certain threshold, you have unlimited reports, right? Where each additional report doesn't constitute as an object. You can see this onto our new pricing plan. So if you're on an objects plan, you can still say, hey, I want to move to the new holistics pricing plan, which you can see onto our public website, if you find that makes sense for your use case. If you are currently on a non-objects-based plan, on a custom plan, we will need you to move to the objects plan. And as much as possible, we will try to reduce the commercial impact of you moving, onto what we think is reasonable. So that itself, y'all can talk to Janice to see, how we can help you with that. And if you're on the enterprise plan, feel free to reach out to your analytics leader inside your company and, arrange a call, with, through the help of Janice or, with your account managers, to talk more about, how we all can help you to transition it. So that's the setup. And if you really decide to go for version 2.7, just some guidelines, you don't need to rush these transitions because you can still coexist them. And the next thing is that you may want to, just as advice, create a new model that you would want to, create a new folder, right, to host your new dashboard and share it with the first pilot group of users, right? And check that the data is consistent over the period of time before you do the full switch. And then finally, you can feel free to ask for help. Like what I shared, you can arrange an onboarding call, with our data team. Right. So going forward, do discuss with your data lead. If they are comfortable to evaluate 2.7, our team will be happy to help you work on the justifications if you need to. But we do need your help to help us help you. Then the next is that, if they want to reach out to us, emails or phone calls, is all available, and video calls, right? And we can even do a complimentary onboarding call to help you figure out how do you do certain things in the new way, that you used to be doing it previously. So that's actually the form. If you click on this form, which my colleague will share with you in this chat window, you will actually see a form that looks like this. Right, so just fill up this form, and that's all that is needed. We should be able to turn on these new version 2.7 features for you within the same working day. If you'd like to remain on Holistics version 2.5, that's also okay. You can just fill it up anytime that you are ready to do so. So there's no forced effort to do so. And with that, I'm done with today's session. Just like to thank all of you for your patience, to sit through this, and also for your support for us, over the years. I'd just like to pause here to see if there's any questions any of you may have, before we conclude this session.